Today at shopdap.com, we're going to be going over replacing spark plugs on a VR6 engine. Okay, so before we get into our install, let's talk real briefly about VR6 engines. The install this is on is going to be a 24 valve VR6, which is going to be the same design that you would find on any current model V6 or VR6 engine, which is an ignition coil over plug design. All of those vehicles are going to have a very similar install to this, and that would include models like the VR6 R32 in Mark IV and Mark V, the V6 Passat, which would be B7 model body platform, so any 3.6 V6 Passat. Touaregs that have a V6 engine would be a VR6 engine, as well as the CC with a V6 is actually a VR6 engine. So all of those models are going to have a very similar install to what we showed today. So let's get into that install. Okay, so what we're going to do is here are all of our ignition coils. These are our ignition coil connectors. So we're going to start by removing these connectors, and what you're going to do is kind of push back on the tab and then kind of pull up on it. It will release. So basically what you're going to do is take this connector, you're going to pull back on this tab and then push down and then pull up. This will allow you to kind of get that ignition coil actually disconnected. So what oftentimes people end up doing is breaking these because they put too much pressure thinking that it's not released. Keep in mind, there's not a lot you need to do to release them. They just get stuck because they kind of get dirty over time and get a bunch of stuff in there. So, and again, the tabs alternate on sides. So again, if you're having trouble getting it up, a lot of times you can just wiggle it like that. Pull back on the tab. This is a pick. You can kind of pull back on the tab and then kind of rock it back and forth to get it to release. Now, as I mentioned, people often break these. This last connector is actually broken on the tab on the back. So I'm going to try to get a closer angle to see if I can show you exactly how we would get that off if you had a broken connector. Okay, so here we have our last ignition coil we're working on here. This is broken. See the tab here? This is normally where you would push on it. And so what we're going to do is take our pick and actually stick it down where that tab would be. And there's going to be a small hole in between where the connector actually meets the coil, and that's got to get over that tab to release. So once we get it in there, we should be able to just pull up and get it off. So again, we're just going to show you right here where we're actually going in right here and actually popping in. You can see through the hole all the way through here. That's where the latch actually mechanism is on the ignition coil. So you're getting in beneath there and then popping it up past the latch assembly, and then you can just slide it out of the way. Now that we have our ignition coil connectors off, we have our special tool. This is an ignition coil puller tool. It comes with a set that we have available, which we'll link to in the description. And all we're gonna do is hook that underneath our ignition coil. And then once you get that under, pull back like that, and it's going to pop it out of place. And again, without this, you can do this without this, but if you look, it actually grabs into the base of this coil, and this is not super easy to do without this puller. Now we're going to start by removing the spark plugs. Obviously, spark plug socket. We'll have a link to a spark plug socket that will work for this vehicle in the description as well. Okay, now we're going to reinstall our spark plugs. We're going to be using Bosch plugs, which are the original replacement plugs for this vehicle that we have available. We'll have those as well linked in the description. And what I like to do is just thread them all in by hand before you proceed with any tightening. And now our last one, we can snug it up and then we'll be ready to tighten them up and torque them down. All right, now we're gonna proceed with tightening our spark plugs. This, just for reference, this is starting at cylinder 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So obviously starts here and goes across. We're gonna start by tightening on cylinder 1. It doesn't really matter what order you're tightening in. Also, a quick note, and something that I forgot to mention, when you're installing spark plugs, or oftentimes when you're checking or having misfire issues around a VW or Audi, we have a video that actually shows you how to diagnose a misfire before obviously replacing parts. So I'll put a link to that here where you can check out that video. And we're gonna start by tightening our spark plugs. And these are gonna be 20 Newton meters each as per VW spec, which is not very tight at all. Now we're gonna reinstall our ignition coils, and one thing obviously you wanna mention here is as you're doing, you wanna make sure the orientation of the ignition coil is correct, because these connectors have a flat side and then a round side. You wanna make sure you have the orientation of the ignition coil correct before you push it down in place, because then you won't have to take it out back out again. So we're gonna go ahead and just use the ignition coil puller to push these back down. You'll hear them kind of snap down, and then you can lock that in place and follow along with every single cylinder here. And we're all set. And one thing I want to mention with this damaged ignition coil connector here, you can either roll with it the way we did here, and you can kind of take it in and out with the pick to remove that locking tab. If you want to replace your ignition coil connector, I'll link to a video that we actually show that describes exactly how you would go about replacing this ignition coil connector. It does require some special tools, so you would need that if you're actually trying to remove it. What you would actually do is remove the wires from the connector and swap them into a new connector. Thank you so much for watching our VR6 spark plug DIY. If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more like it.